They abandoned me on the side of the road, but forgot the car was still in my name. My name is David, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about trust, friendship, and justice. It's a story that starts with betrayal and ends with something I never expected: my own empowerment. It was a Friday night in late October when everything fell apart. The kind of crisp autumn evening that should have been filled with laughter and good memories. Instead, it became the night I discovered who my real friends were and who they weren't. We had planned this weekend getaway for months. Jake, Marcus, Tony, and me. College buddies who'd stayed close through our 30s, despite careers pulling us in different directions. The plan was simple: drive up to Jake's family cabin in the mountains, disconnect from the world, and relive our glory days with poker, beer, and stories we'd told 100 times before. I volunteered my car for the trip. It made sense. I had the newest vehicle, a reliable SUV with plenty of space for our weekend supplies. What I didn't know was that this simple gesture of friendship would become the catalyst for the most humiliating yet ultimately liberating experience of my adult life. The first red flag should have been their behavior during the drive. Usually our road trips were filled with music, jokes, and that easy camaraderie we'd built over decades. But this time, there were hushed conversations when they thought I couldn't hear, meaningful glances exchanged in the rearview mirror, and an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite place. Marcus kept checking his phone obsessively. Tony seemed nervous, fidgeting with the radio and avoiding eye contact. Jake, normally the joker of our group, was unusually quiet. I chalked it up to work stress. We were all dealing with our own pressures. But my gut was telling me something else entirely. When we stopped for gas about an hour outside the city, I overheard a snippet of conversation that made my blood run cold. "After we get there," Jake was saying to Marcus, "just stick to the plan." "What plan?" I asked, approaching them at the pump. "Nothing, man," Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Just talking about poker strategy. You know how seriously Marcus takes his cards." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. These were my closest friends. Guys I'd stood up for at their weddings, who'd been there when my father died, who I trusted with my deepest secrets. Surely my paranoia was just getting the better of me. But as we continued toward the cabin, the atmosphere grew thicker with unspoken tension. The jokes felt forced, the laughter hollow. By the time we arrived at the isolated mountain retreat, I felt like I was traveling with strangers wearing my friends' faces. The cabin was perfect, exactly what we'd needed to decompress, rustic but comfortable, surrounded by towering pines and complete silence except for the occasional sound of wildlife. Under normal circumstances, this would have been paradise. Instead, it felt ominous. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit sharing drinks and attempting to recapture our old dynamic, I noticed something else troubling. They kept checking the time, exchanging those same, meaningful looks, and Jake kept stepping away to take work calls that seemed suspicious given our supposed digital detox weekend. Around midnight, as the fire died down and we were preparing to head inside, Marcus suddenly doubled over, claiming severe stomach pains. He looked genuinely distressed, sweating and pale. "We need to get him to a hospital," Tony announced urgently. "This could be appendicitis." The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away, down winding mountain roads that would be treacherous in my condition. I'd had several beers and was in no state to drive safely. That's when Jake made the suggestion that would change everything. "Look, David, you're in no condition to drive, and Marcus needs medical attention now," he said, his voice carrying an authority that felt rehearsed. "Tony and I will take him to the hospital while you stay here and sleep it off. We'll be back in the morning." Something felt wrong about this plan, but with Marcus moaning in apparent agony, I didn't have time to process my doubts. I handed over my keys, watching as they helped Marcus into my SUV. The last thing I remember was Jake promising they'd be back by sunrise and Tony telling me to get some rest. I woke up Sunday afternoon with a splitting headache and the sinking realization that I was completely alone. No car, no friends, no explanation. My phone had been dying when they left, and with no charger at the cabin, I was completely cut off. The landline had been disconnected years ago. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the clothes on my back and a growing sense of dread. Walking to the main road took nearly an hour through dense forest. When I finally flagged down a passing truck, the elderly driver looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Disheveled man stumbling out of the woods probably wasn't the most reassuring sight. "You okay, son?" he asked through his rolled-down window. "My friends. They took my car to the hospital and never came back," I explained, hearing how pathetic it sounded even as I said it. He gave me a ride to the nearest town, a tiny mountain community with one gas station, a diner, and not much else. The diner owner let me use her phone to call Jake. It went straight to voicemail. Same with Marcus and Tony. That's when panic really set in. Had something terrible happened to them? Was Marcus seriously ill? Had there been an accident? Or, and this thought made my stomach churn, had they abandoned me intentionally? I called the local hospitals. No record of anyone matching Marcus's description being admitted. I called the police, but they told me I needed to wait 48 hours before filing a missing persons report, and since the car was registered to me, it wasn't technically stolen. The diner owner, a kind woman named Betty who reminded me of my grandmother, let me sit in a corner booth while I tried to figure out my next move. That's when I had the thought that would change everything. My car had GPS tracking through my insurance company's app. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost," Betty said, refilling my coffee cup for the 4th time. "I think I just figured something out," I told her, my hands shaking as I pulled up the app on my phone. The little blue dot representing my SUV wasn't at any hospital. It was parked outside a casino 3 hours away, in the opposite direction from any medical facility. They were gambling, with my car. After abandoning me in the wilderness, the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. These weren't friends who had encountered an emergency. These were people who had planned this, who had used me and my vehicle for their own purposes, who had left me stranded without a second thought. But as I stared at that blue dot, something else began to build inside me alongside the hurt and anger. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of power, of control, of having options. "Betty," I said, looking up from my phone with what must have been a strange expression, "do you know anyone with a truck who might be willing to make a little money today?" Her nephew Danny, a mechanic in his 20s, agreed to drive me to the casino for $200, money I charged to my credit card through the gas station's ATM. During the 3-hour drive, I had plenty of time to think, and what I realized surprised me. This wasn't just about getting my car back. This was about something much deeper, about years of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the friend who always said yes without asking questions. I was the one who always volunteered my car, my house, my time. I was the one who picked up the tab when others conveniently forgot their wallets. I was the peacekeeper who avoided confrontation, even when I was being taken advantage of. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. You see, I worked in risk management for an insurance company. My job was literally to think through every possible scenario, to plan for contingencies, to understand the fine print that most people ignored. And in their hurry to execute whatever scheme they'd concocted, they had forgotten some very important details about my car. First, the GPS tracking. But that was just the beginning. My SUV had several anti-theft features that could be activated remotely. I could lock the doors, disable the engine, even set off the alarm from anywhere in the country using my smartphone app. I could also see exactly where the car had been, how fast they'd been driving, and how many miles they'd put on it. The data told a story that made my blood boil. They hadn't driven straight to the casino. They'd made multiple stops, a liquor store, a gas station where they'd filled up using my credit card, which I'd stupidly left in the center console for emergencies, and what appeared to be someone's house where they'd stayed for several hours. They'd been planning this for days, maybe Weeks. The emergency with Marcus was clearly fabricated. They'd used me, my trust, and my resources for their own weekend adventure, fully intending to leave me stranded. But here's what they didn't know about me, what nobody knew. I had been documenting everything, screenshots of their locations, photos of my credit card statements, records of their phone calls going straight to voicemail. In my line of work, documentation was everything. As Danny and I approached the casino, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete clarity about who I was and what I was worth. I wasn't the pushover they thought I was. I wasn't the friend who would just accept this treatment and move on for the sake of keeping the peace. I was someone who understood consequences, who knew how to use systems and rules to protect myself, who had finally reached the point where enough was enough. Pull. Over here, I told Danny as we spotted my SUV in the casino parking lot. I want to call the police first. 911, what's your emergency? I'd like to report a stolen vehicle, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The dispatcher took down the details. My car, my registration taken. Without permission by people I knew. The fact that I knew the perpetrators didn't change the legal reality. They had my car without my consent, had used my credit card without authorization, and had left me stranded. 2 patrol cars arrived within 15 minutes. Officer Rodriguez, a woman about my age with kind but no-nonsense eyes, listened to my story with professional attention. So these are people you know? She asked. I thought I knew them, I replied. But friends don't abandon friends and steal their cars. The casino security team was incredibly helpful once they understood the situation. They pulled up security footage showing Jake, Marcus, and Tony entering the casino around 2 a.m. Saturday, just hours after claiming Marcus needed emergency medical attention. The timestamp proved they'd driven straight from the cabin to the casino with no hospital stops. But I wasn't done. While Officer Rodriguez processed the paperwork, I activated every anti-theft feature my car had. The doors locked automatically. The engine disabled itself. And then, just because I could, I triggered the alarm. Even from inside the casino, we could hear it blaring across the parking lot. Within minutes, Jake, Marcus, and Tony came running out, looking panicked and confused. Marcus, I noted, seemed to have made a miraculous recovery from his life-threatening stomach ailment. The moment they saw the police cars, their expressions changed from confusion to recognition to something approaching terror. Jake immediately started toward Officer Rodriguez, his hands raised in what he probably thought was a calming gesture. Officer, there's been a misunderstanding, he began, but she cut him off. Are you Jacob Morrison? She asked, consulting her paperwork. Yes, but you're under arrest. For unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Watching them get handcuffed was surreal. These were people I'd shared countless memories with. People whose families I knew, whose children called me Uncle David. But as the officers read them their rights, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Marcus tried to maintain the medical emergency story until Officer Rodriguez informed him that they'd already confirmed no one matching his description had been admitted to any area hospital. Tony just kept repeating "this is crazy" over and over, as if saying it enough times would make it true. Jake looked directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. You're really going to destroy our friendship over this? He asked as they put him in the patrol car. You destroyed our friendship when you abandoned me in the woods, I replied. I'm just making sure there are consequences. The casino security footage revealed they'd spent nearly 10 hours gambling, using cash they'd withdrawn from an ATM using my credit card. They'd lost over $3,000. My $3,000. Officer Rodriguez explained my options. I could press charges for unauthorized use of a vehicle, credit card fraud, and abandonment, or I could handle it civilly. The choice was mine. Looking at my former friends in the back of police cars, I realized this moment was about more than revenge. It was about finally standing up for myself, about refusing to be anyone's doormat. Ever again. I want to press charges, I said. The legal process took months, but it gave me time to reflect on patterns I'd been ignoring for years. This wasn't the first time these men had taken advantage of my generosity, just the most blatant. There had been countless dinners where I'd ended up paying borrowed money that was never repaid, favors that were never reciprocated. I'd been so afraid of losing their friendship that I'd lost respect for myself. During the trial preparation, more details emerged that made their betrayal even more calculated. Text messages recovered from their phones showed they'd been planning this for weeks. Marcus had researched the casino specifically. Tony had scouted the cabin location to ensure I'd be stranded with no easy way out. Jake had suggested my car because, in his words, David's too much of a pushover to make a big deal about it. That phrase, too much of a pushover, became my turning point. It's one thing to suspect people see you as weak. It's another to have it confirmed in writing, submitted as evidence in a court of law. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, helped me understand the full scope of what they'd done. Beyond the car theft and credit card fraud, their actions constituted criminal abandonment under state law. They had knowingly left me in a dangerous situation without means of communication or transportation. They were gambling that you'd be too embarrassed or too nice to fight back, Sarah explained. During one of our meetings, they saw your kindness as weakness. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. Faced with overwhelming evidence, GPS data, security footage, financial records, their own text messages, all three pled guilty to reduced charges. Jake and Tony received probation and community service. Marcus, who had a prior conviction for credit card fraud, received 6 months in county jail. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was personal. During those months, I rebuilt my life with new priorities. I changed my phone number and blocked them on all social media. I started saying no to requests that didn't serve my interests. I began dating again after years of putting my social life second to maintaining these toxic friendships. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. Those red flags I'd noticed during our drive to the cabin, I'd been right to feel uneasy. My gut had been trying to protect me, but I'd ignored it to maintain the illusion of friendship. I also discovered something surprising. I didn't miss them. The relief of not having to walk on eggshells, not having to wonder if I was being used, not having to be the responsible one all the time. It was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. 6 months after the trial, Jake tried to contact me through a mutual acquaintance. He wanted to make things right, to explain his side of the story. The old me might have listened, might have been tempted to forgive for the sake of nostalgia, but I'd changed. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that you can let go of anger without letting people back into your life. Block 6. Expanded. Today, 3 years later, I tell this story not for sympathy, but for the lesson it taught me about self-worth and boundaries. That weekend in the mountains was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. It was the worst because it showed me how little these people I'd called friends actually valued me. It was the best because it forced me to value myself. But the real transformation didn't happen overnight. It took months of therapy to understand how I'd become the person who accepted scraps of respect while calling it friendship. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me see patterns that went back to childhood. The people-pleasing, the fear of abandonment, the belief that my worth was tied to what I could provide for others. David, she said during one particularly difficult session, when did you first learn that love was conditional on your usefulness? The question hit me like a lightning bolt. I was 8 years old again, desperately trying to earn my father's approval by being the perfect son, the one who never caused trouble, never asked for too much, never made waves. That scared little boy had grown into a man who gave pieces of himself away, hoping someone would finally say he was enough. I've built new friendships, real ones, based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. These new relationships feel different. There's an ease to them, a reciprocity that I'd never experienced before. When I help a friend move, they show up when I need help with my renovation project. When I listen to their problems, they're equally present for mine. It's revolutionary. The idea that friendship could be balanced. I've learned that true friends don't abandon you, don't steal from you, and don't call you a pushover behind your back. True friends wouldn't even consider doing what Jake, Marcus, and Tony did to me. More importantly, I've learned that I deserve friends who see my kindness as a gift, not a weakness to exploit. The car they forgot was still in my name became a metaphor for something larger. The power I'd forgotten was still mine. The power to set boundaries, to demand respect, to walk away from people who don't deserve my time or energy. But it wasn't just about the car. It was about reclaiming every part of my life I'd given away in the name of keeping peace. I started small. I stopped automatically picking up the check at dinners. I stopped saying yes to every request for help. I started asking myself a simple question before agreeing to anything. Is this serving me, or am I just being used? The answers were often uncomfortable but illuminating. I kept that SUV for 2 more years before trading it in, and every time I looked at it, I was reminded not of betrayal, but of strength. Of the moment I chose to stand up for myself instead of making excuses for people who didn't deserve my loyalty. Sometimes I'd sit in the driver's seat and remember that night. Not the abandonment, but the moment I realized I had the power to change everything. The legal victory was satisfying, but the personal victory was life-changing. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you mean or difficult. It makes you strong. It makes you someone who commands respect rather than someone who begs for it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret pressing charges, if I think I overreacted. My answer is always the same. I regret not standing up for myself sooner. I regret all the times I swallowed my pride, ignored my instincts, and accepted less than I deserved. I regret teaching people that they could treat me poorly without consequences. But I don't regret finding my voice. I don't regret learning my worth. I don't regret becoming the kind of person who won't tolerate being abandoned on the side of the road, literally or metaphorically. The truth is, they were counting on my niceness, my desire to avoid conflict, my fear of being alone. They gambled that I would accept their treatment because I always had before. They bet that I was too weak to fight back, too dependent on their approval to risk losing it. They lost that bet spectacularly, and in losing it, they taught me the most valuable lesson of my adult life. Respect is not something you earn through accommodation and self-sacrifice. Respect is something you command by knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. This lesson extends far beyond friendship. It changed how I approach my career, my romantic relationships, every interaction I have. I negotiate better salaries now because I know my value. I set boundaries in dating because I won't accept being someone's backup plan. I speak up in meetings because my ideas matter. The scared, people-pleasing man who handed over his car keys that night is gone. In his place is someone who understands that saying no is not selfish, it's necessary. Someone who knows that being alone is better than being with people who make you feel alone. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're the friend who always pays, always drives, always accommodates, always forgives, I want you to know something. Your kindness is not weakness, but allowing others to exploit it is. You have more power than you realize. You have the right to set boundaries, to say no, to walk away from people who take more than they give. You have the right to demand better, to expect reciprocity, to be valued for who you are rather than what you provide. Stop making yourself smaller to make others comfortable. Stop apologizing for taking up space. Stop accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. You deserve friends who would never abandon you. You deserve people who see your worth without you having to prove it constantly. You deserve relationships that fill your cup instead of draining it. The hardest part isn't recognizing toxic patterns. It's having the courage to break them. It's choosing temporary discomfort over permanent diminishment. It's risking being alone to avoid being lonely in a crowd. But here's what I learned. When you start respecting yourself, the right people notice. When you stop accepting scraps, you make room for abundance. When you value yourself, you attract others who value you too. They abandoned me on the side of the road, thinking I was powerless. But they forgot the most important thing. The car and the power was still in my name. And so was my life. So is yours. 3 years later, I drive a different car, but I carry the same lesson. Never again will I give someone else the keys to my self-worth. Never again will I strand myself in someone else's wilderness, waiting for rescue that will never come. I am my own rescue. You are yours. The road ahead is mine to choose, mine to drive, mine to control. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly where I'm going. Toward people who would never dream of leaving me behind. Toward relationships that honor my worth. Toward a life where I'm valued not for what I can give, but for who I am. That's real victory. Not revenge, but reclamation. Not punishment, but power. The car was always in my name, I just had to remember that I was the one holding the keys.